Goldstein.
Thank you, Chairman Adderholt, Ranking Member DeLauro, for holding this hearing, and I thank you, Secretary McMahon, for being here today. I want to start with the role of the Department of Education. I come at this as a mother, as a grandmother, a former teacher myself, a former state legislator with two grandmothers who were public school teachers. I have a lot of experience with the education system in Pennsylvania as well as the country. First, the history of the federal education involvement, and Ms. Watson-Coleman was getting at some of this that I'd like to build upon. Federal investments in education began to increase dramatically in the 50s and 60s and 70s, in tandem with the rise of the success of the civil rights movement. Americans finally began to recognize the vast inequalities in our education system. Thus, federal funding was used to improve education access for students from poor backgrounds or minority students, for women, for people with disabilities, and other marginalized groups. Finally, Congress established the Department of Education in 1979, replacing the Office of Education. Secretary McMahon, it's alarming that you and the President want to turn that clock back. You take us back to a time before any federal oversight of education, before many of the programs that guarantee free and equal access to education for all Americans. You said as much in your testimony. After all the Department of Education's work to ensure equal access to education, you're embarking on the department's final mission? You intend to put yourself out of a job? That's a little jarring to me. If you were a pediatric oncologist, I'd welcome that. Let's get you out of a job through cures, through healing, through ending of pediatric cancer. But ending a department that is supposed to oversee the education of our very youngest, to guide their future? Have you taken the time to educate yourself about this history? I'd encourage you, go ask students who attended school back then. Black students, brown students, students with disabilities, students from poor families. What was access like for them before the Department of Education? Frankly, eliminating the Department of Education, to me, is rather Orwellian. The President and his administration don't want an educated populace. Why don't we just go back to the book 1984 if it hasn't been banned? It's clear to me, this administration wants an uneducated electorate so that Mr. Trump and his courtiers can control thought, therefore control votes, and control the population. I'll note a secondary measure here that is going on. The increase in funding for charter schools. We know that charter schools originally were supposed to be incubators of the best ideas, great practices to be brought back into the public school education system so that every kid had an access to such things. But this administration and you, who want to put yourself out of a job, following the playbook, page 319 of Project 2025, first sentence, shutter the Department of Education. You're all following the book, that book. Too bad that one wasn't banned. And yet, privatizing is really the other ambition, an uneducated electorate and profit and privatization of our education system. Do you promise us that that isn't your ambition?
That clearly is not my ambition. I think I've stated that very well today.
Then why in God's name do you want to shutter it? Why don't you want to protect kids with disabilities? Why don't you want to protect kids who have been every decade denied equal access simply because of how much their parents make, the zip code they live in, the color of their skin? Why are you shuttering a department that's supposed to lift up those children?
Because those programs don't have to flow through the Department of Education, and they
can flow through the state. I was a state legislator. That's called shift and shaft. I've spoken with the governor of Pennsylvania. They can't pick up the tab anymore for education of our students. Not to mention, it would be inequitable by state, by state, by state. Why are you in this job at all? If you don't have a dedication to the future of our children, why are you in this job?
I, too, am a mother and a grandmother, and I want the best for my family going forward.
Vouchers.
For my grandchildren, for my great-grandchildren, and I hope to leave a legacy that we have established best practices for education that all the states can use. That would be a great legacy to be able to leave, to be able to show states these are some of the things that they can do. I think states have to look at their budgets.
Madam Secretary, the legacy you will be leaving is that I shut down the Department of Education. How we educate our children determines not just their future, but our own.
But the
I think it's a
department-
sad legacy you will leave. I yield back.
The Department of Education is not educating anyone. Well, I can say this. And I
Mr.
will.
Harder.
Thank you so much. And Secretary McMahon, thank you for being here. I want to talk about early childhood education. I probably think more about early childhood development than some of my colleagues because I'm still living it every day. I have two young daughters, Lillian and Karina, ages 3 and 1. Like millions of parents, I know firsthand how critical access to early learning is, not just for kids, but for working families and the future of our communities. Secretary McMahon, do you believe every child deserves access to a high-quality early childhood education?
I believe that every child deserves access to a high-quality, equal access to education.
Great. Then I think we agree. I think every child and every family should be able to enroll their kids in high-quality, safe preschools. As you know, research shows that children who attend preschool are 18% more likely to go to college than those who didn't. We know that early childhood education shapes lifelong outcomes. It impacts literacy, graduation rates, employment, even health and public safety. These are real facts. But I'm concerned about what's happening with Head Start, a program that makes preschool reality for over 800,000 families. I know this technically falls under HHS, but as Secretary of Education, I can imagine you'd care deeply about this topic as you're responsible for the future of every kid in America. Have you discussed Head Start funding with the administration and the budget, and what are your views on what's happening with the current freezes and the challenges with the Head Start program?
I've not had conversations with the Department of HHS, so no, they're not part of my budget considerations at this point.
Do you have a view on whether or not preschool through Head Start is important as a grounds for a student's education?
I think the earlier we can start education, the better it is for every child. I look at mothers who spend time with their children, reading to them when other children may not have that benefit. I think those children definitely have an advantage, and you'd like to see that. But I don't think that the federal government has the responsibility for that. I think that should be looked at more in state budgets and how states can best set up their programs.
I hear you. I did a lot of reading with my daughters and continue to do so. But did I understand that you do not believe that the federal government should be supporting programs like Head Start, and that should be the job of other organizations and states and parents?
Well, currently it is the responsibility of a different agency, and I'm sure that they are looking at what aspects they are funding as they go through their budget process.
Well, I think this has real implications on the work that you do. This is a cornerstone of American education. And I think that what's happening with Head Start is very concerning. We're seeing these delays, these freezes that ultimately hurt kids. We've seen Head Start schools close across the country because they only have 3 days of funding right now. Every Head Start program in the country has 3 days of funding. And I think that is going to have an implication on our kids' ability to read, write, and do math. And so I would think, as the Secretary of Education, that you should have a perspective on this and a real goal towards committing to the parents of Head Start students in my district across the country to fight to make sure that this program is fully funded. Is that something that you believe in, that this program should be funded, and pushing back on any attempt to cut it?
I'm going to let the department and the agencies that are responsible for those parts of the budget do their job.
I think it has an implication for the Department of Education that is real. Let me tell you what's at stake. In my district, 1,600 kids rely on Head Start. This is the first type of education that any student receives. And I think passing it off on some other department is unacceptable because we know that Head Start students are 13 percentage points less likely to commit a crime. They're more likely to graduate high school, less likely to experience a teen pregnancy. This is our kids' futures, and our entire communities are lifted up because of this program. So I think saying that this part of the education system isn't your responsibility doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I think you should be terrified at the idea of Head Start being gutted because it's going to have major ramifications on our students' ability to have the future that we want. It's your duty to make sure that programs like this continue. And so I hope that you see that our kids aren't line items, they're not pawns in a political game, they're not disposable, and that we need to make sure that Head Start is continuing to be strong and that cuts like the ones we've seen over the last couple months don't happen if we're going to be able to make sure that every kid has quality education in the United States. I hope you remember that, and I yield back.